I want to do that voice. Recording in progress.
You can. You do. You just did.
For the benefit of people who don't know you like I do, just tell me a little bit about maybe a lot about your experience in leading in business and really leading global leaders, kind of like leaders leading leaders.
Yeah, maybe I'll work backwards then, Leanne. So the leaders leading leaders conversation really comes from my experience in YPO. So I've been in the organization now 22 years. And for those who don't know a YPO, it is a global organization of peers, of CEOs in, I think, 142 countries and 30,000 members. And so I had the opportunity to kind of lead as part of what they call the volunteer organization. And I was fortunate enough to keep saying yes until I reached, I guess, the pinnacle in my world of being a chair of one of the major boards in YPO. And the key there was, when we say leading leaders, these are peers. In fact, a lot of people are running businesses of huge magnitudes. And so for me, to be quite honest, it was a little intimidating at first to be able to be a leader of, and they happen to be all men, a board of 15, where, I was running one of the smaller businesses relative to what they were doing. But what it taught me was that if you have good leadership traits, you're honest, you're authentic, you're real, and you care about people, then people follow, because that's what leaders do. They have followers. And so for me, the biggest lesson was I was thrown into the pool and I learned how to lead. And for me, it was life-changing in a lot of ways.
But did you learn how to lead just from YPO, or you knew how to lead already?
Well, you learn you're leading differently though, right? So you learn to lead when you're the CEO or a leader of a business. You have authority and you have the ability to tell people what to do. When you're in YPO, it's volunteer. So you need to spend more time on encouraging and leading and empowering and doing all those things, because you can't tell people what to do. And that's the difference. And in fact, the beautiful dichotomy of that is when you can do that well, when you go back into your business, you still have the ability to say, well, this is where we're going. And you're following me because that's what I said. It's hard to do in YPO. You can still do it. It just doesn't have the same lasting effect.
But I think you came by that naturally, right?
Sports was part of my life. And I think you learn a lot about leadership in sports in terms of what your role is, whether you're a captain or you have a particular role. And then all the experience I had growing up in all the different businesses, I learned different parts of leadership and got to practice different parts of leadership. Where for me, the pinnacle ended up being YPO. But, it's like anything else with any leadership, Leanne. It's not, you don't check a box and say, I'm a leader. You're always developing this skill and being self-aware. And I know we'll talk a little bit about that later.
So why do you want to share these stories with people?
Well, I'm incredibly passionate about leadership because I think it's what makes the world go around, whether it's in politics, which we don't want to get into too deeply today because politics are fun, but it is a form of leadership. Unfortunately, we're seeing the worst parts of that in the world. But when you have leaderships, whether it's in the spiritual world, whether you're church or mosque or synagogue, or whether it's sports, or whether it's a business, or whether it's a family, when we have great leaders, then we'll have better outcomes. So for me, sharing my experience is really rooted in hopefully making the place, and I don't want to over dramatize it, but making a little deposit for making the world a little bit better.
Yeah. Did you find a lot of differences when you were traveling the globe with YPO?
Yeah.
Share?
Yeah, leadership, it's interesting. And I think the distinction between leadership and execution was an interesting lesson for me. I think for me, leaders were very similar all around the world. Certain exceptions. There are certain cultures that are very autocratic and saying, you're going to do what I say because I'm the boss. And that boss title really became important. I can lead that way. I don't like to lead that way. But what I learned was, one of the biggest lessons was, I still led with empathy and all the things that I think everybody would know about what good leadership is. But what you realize in certain cultures is the communication might be different. They may not want to give you bad news, where in fact, in my world, I would say, please share bad news with me so we can deal with it. Some cultures, they don't want to give you bad news. So I had to learn that and say, okay, it's not about leading, it's leading the same way, but the communication vehicles are different. So you really have to give them permission to do that, understanding there's no consequence of being open in that way. And so that was a big lesson for me.
So they just wouldn't give their boss bad news?
No, they absolutely didn't. In fact, months went by before I actually was able to look at it and say, well, what happened to this? Well, we knew about it a month and a half ago. We didn't want to tell you because we knew you'd be upset. And so I became upset and said, here's the way this will work going forward. So you have to switch from your empathetic leader to your directive leader and saying, here's what we're going to do going forward. If you get bad news, 3 minutes later, I want to know about it. Why? So we can deal with it together. That's all they needed was permission. But I didn't know that they were afraid to do that. So again, a great lesson to be able to say now, after that, it was open. They would just communicate with me, feel open because the fear went away. Their culture said, give bad news, get fear. My world was, give me bad news, let's work together on a solution. That wasn't what they were used to. So that's what I had to learn and grow and also teach them about. And it worked out well in the end, but it was painful to get there.
I bet. So because you brought it up, why don't we talk a little bit about a directive leader and an empathetic leader?
Well, we'll call it authoritarian leaders, if you will. They're more directive in their strategy and their style. So they're the ones who tell people what to do. And it's a little bit of a fear-based leadership. You see that sometimes in sports where you get yelling and screaming and all that other stuff. So that's one aspect, and that can work in certain circumstances. When I say can work, if the objective is to tear things down, tear a business down and rebuild it, sometimes there's no time to develop people because you're in there to rip it down and build it back up. But if you're looking for long-term success in any leadership adventure, I don't care if you're in a church or a synagogue or a mosque or you're a sports team or whatever it happens to be, I think when you lead with empathy or lead with your heart, my definition of that is you're really leading with your heart and your emotional quotient, if you will, is really being sensitive to the people that are around you and understanding that our job at the end of the day as leaders is to help them as opposed to being a boss. And so that's where I see the big differences in those two styles.
Now, would you say that being an empathetic leader, though, it's really a lifestyle? Because you're not just an empathetic leader, you're also that way in life as well.
You would hope. But yes, I think that isn't it better if you're a natural empathetic leader in business and then you transfer that and be that with your family? Doesn't that make more sense? You're talking to your kids in the same way, as opposed to you better eat your vegetables. I mean, think about it. The kids are no different. They want to be valued and loved and supported the way your employees do, right? So I think it is, whether we call it a lifestyle or a skill that you develop as a human, isn't it better to be a kind and supportive and empathetic human? And then as a leader, you happen to be that same way. You do have other tools in the toolbox you need to use, but clearly I think if you lead that way, then I think people follow you better.
Yeah. So because there's like thousands and millions of books, I feel like, on leadership.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can read all the leadership books you want, and it's all about practice. It's like reading a playbook, right? So the difference between what you talk about and what's in every other book out there is what?
Well, do the math. Do we have a leadership vacuum in the world? Yeah, I think kind of we do. Start thinking about this for a second. As you suggested, reading and doing are two different things. Leadership is a skill. It has to be developed. Yeah, we could argue the whole, are there leaders that are born? There are leaders that have certain charisma and certain attributes for sure. I think we could argue that. But it is a skill. And what you learn as a leader is you need to continually develop that skill because there are times that you use it and there are times that you don't. And here's where I think the real story comes in around leadership. You know, perfect situations, everybody can be, I'll ask you great questions, I'll coach you, I'll empower you. Let's talk about your career. Let's talk about your family. But now your business is struggling with cash flow. You know, there's an investigation, there's a lawsuit, you're incredibly stressed, you're having trouble at home, you're not sleeping well, you're putting on too much weight. All those things happen and you still have to be the leader. That's the story that doesn't get told. Is that how do you deal with you as the human so that you can be at your best with your staff? Not always easy, because one of the biggest challenges we face as all humans is being self-aware. Do we know how we're coming across? And are we apologetic when we screw up? Right? That really important to be able to do that, because when your leader is vulnerable and open and real, then your staff feel open enough to have that conversation. So when you're having a bad day, it's okay. You've made all these deposits that were positive. If you're always having a bad day, then they're going to avoid you. So that's where I think the big difference is.
Yeah, I think so. So what is one of your really fundamental truths about leadership?
One word, Leanne: authenticity. You are you, Dr. Seuss, back to Dr. Seuss again.
Only you are you.
Only you are you. But the reality is, if you're authentic, and listen, authentic, that not everybody's built to be a great empathetic leader. Let's be honest, right? So there's different grades around, oh my God, they're amazing, to, they're okay, they're doing their job. But if you're always real and you're consistent, even if you're a bit of a hard ass, excuse the language, if you're a bit of a hard ass, but you're consistently a hard ass, people will learn to work with you in that way. And I'm not suggesting you should be a hard ass. There are moments where you need to be a hard ass as a leader, but if your reflex is always empathy, then you'll move back and forth through the other things. And I think that's really the secret. If you're authentic, people then can be consistent about how they talk to you. And that's really important, rather than who is he going to be or she to be today? I don't know what I'm getting from her. She's not listening to me. She's yelling at me. She's short with me. She's shutting me down. He's shutting me down, whatever that is. Those are the things that people can't stand. And that's why that authenticity matters to me.
There's a she. You're not talking to me, right?
God, I would never do that because I'm afraid of you, Leanne. No. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not really afraid. I'm not afraid. Okay, I'm overcompensating. Sorry. I'm overcompensating. I'm projecting. Oh no, what am I doing?
You better be afraid. That's so funny. If people knew us, they'd know why that was so funny. So what's the most powerful question that you can ask in leadership?
Well, I think it's really simple. What do you think? Mm. Now let's break that down a little bit. Why is that so important? Well, sometimes you would ask.
I thought you meant, what do I think? The most important question is.
If this wasn't about me, I would be doing that. But this is about me, and that's all that matters. Oh, sorry, I'm off script now. No, the reality, if you think about that question, when someone comes to you, what do employees come to you with? Problems all the time, right? Staff come to you with problems, and 90% of the time, you know the answer, right? Go here, do this, do that. Problem gets solved. Off we go. Is that helping them grow? Is that helping them think? No. So when you ask them their opinion, you may know the answer to the question, but you're helping them feel involved, empowered, and it helps them develop and it helps build their confidence. And they come to you with more solutions than problems before. So now, let's be honest, it's hard to do sometimes because we get crazy busy and you know the answer and the shortcut is, yeah, just go do that and do that and do that. So let's be honest, I do that a lot, but I try to bring it back. As we talked about earlier, because it's a skill, you can pull back on it and go, okay, I need to spend more time doing that because I've fallen into this trap of being directive, still empathetic, but directive. So to me, that question is powerful. And oh, by the way, if you don't have the answer, it gives you time to think. When you say, what do you think, Sally? And Sally starts talking, well, you know, and the only challenge you face is if their ideas are really shit, you have to find a way to build their confidence and make them feel better and say, well, let's build on that. Have we thought about this? And then you start building on it. So at the end of the day, and that's coaching 101, which I think great leaders do as well.
Yeah, although it does get frustrating sometimes when you say, what do you think? I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, no. But again, you know what, Leanne, part of that challenge, I think, is you build a culture in a company whereby they feel like they can come with ideas and not get shut down, right? Mm-hmm. As we often talk about in our business, is at the end of the day, we see there's no bad ideas because there might be it sounds really crap, and we've had our share in our long careers of really crappy ideas. But when you think back to the purpose of what idea sharing is to let them feel comfortable that they can speak. then we can build on an idea and say, well, they were going somewhere. They didn't have the right contextual idea, but oh my God, there's something I hadn't thought of there. And if you do that collectively over time, you get a lot better results. More importantly, they feel good about themselves, and it helps them get better. So their ideas will get better over time when they don't feel like they're getting shut down.
Yeah. And just, for people who don't know Alan too, I just want to say, I'd like to meet Sally, because you have used Sally all your life since I've known you. Yeah. And I've never met her. She's always Sally. We've never had a Sally that's worked at Infinity. Oh. So I'm not sure who Sally is, but she's obviously made an impression.
Well, Sally's been my virtual,
and Bobby.
Many
Sally
long.
And Bobby.
What are we doing? Sally
it's
and Bobby.
True though. It's your Bobby. Example names.
Yeah,
those are your example names.
Yeah.
No, but I agree. I agree that definitely the most powerful question is, what do you think? And because in a way, and it might not be in exactly that form, but when I was at Bell Mobility, I had my CEO would always say, what do you think? And we knew, because he told you straight off, that you have 1 minute to disagree. So anything, if you disagree with something he's done, or if he makes a statement about how he wants something to be, and you go, but he always said, but what do you think? And then you had 1 minute. And if you weren't able to convince him in that 1 minute, you can't ever come back to it. You just have to get on board. But he was really one of the best CEOs I ever had.
Leanne, it's what he did was he built a culture and made sure, again, that's part of authenticity. You knew what to expect.
Yeah.
And that's important. And you knew you could have a voice, but you better be prepared and you better have good answers, because he's asking you to convince him, right? So, but that's a skill into itself.
Well, and now this was the CEO of Bell Mobility, not BCE, but he was very much your type of leadership, because he would go down to the cafeteria and just sit at any table, invite himself to sit down basically. And he was all about the employees. So I think, the simple fact that I remember him so well says a lot about what you're talking about, which is the authenticity and empathy in leadership, right?
You said a word they remember. People remember great leaders, and they like to forget bad leaders.
I agree.
Well, Leanne, you mentioned the word remember, and I think that the one thing that's really clear about CEOs and presidents, leaders of any type, is you're visible. Think about this. You're standing in front of the pulpit if it's a spiritual thing. You're talking to the team if it's sports. You're the CEO standing in front of the room, or you're a manager, whatever it happens to be. You've been elevated to a place where people watch you now. Yeah. And all the good gets magnified, and the bad gets magnified too. So you need to be aware that when we talk about authenticity, it's not just your words, it's your behaviors. How you act every day, how you come in. Do you come in enthusiastic? Do you say, we need to be positive, and then you're always negative? Those things are really, really critical. You just need to be who you are. And some people have learning disabilities, they have ADHD, they're going to be all across but you know that about them. You say, okay, well, it's going to be a little bit crazy all the time. It's okay. It's an authentic crazy. It's a fun crazy. It's legitimate crazy, but it's not something that you can be inconsistent or be fearful of. And as a leader, when you eliminate fear from people, because you always have that ability to go, this is not working, you're gone. But if they feel safe, because they know what performance means, if we get into the management side of things, all those things matter as a leader. So just remember, there's a magnifying glass on all the things you do. And that's a good thing when you do well.
Yeah. And I think, there's so many layers to unpack there too, like with feeling safe at work, and feeling safe to be the best you that you bring to work, to really show what you're capable of when you're in a safe environment. And, as you, I'm sure, remember from last year, the Moments Matter campaign, around sexual harassment was all about moments matter, because it's leaders who are respected and create good working cultures basically have better employees because they feel safe, and it doesn't leave room for things like sexual harassment and bullying and things like that. And so if we think about the magnitude of the responsibility in creating moments where our employees know that we support them and they can feel safe. And I think you can only do that, to your point, when you're being authentic and empathetic as a leader.
Yeah, because again, we go back to what we talked about at the beginning. We're dealing with human beings, and humans are emotional beings. That's what we are. And so we all build up walls, we build up things to protect ourselves. So when you feel that, and you spend more time at work than you do in any other place. So not only do you want to feel safe from your leadership, is that you want to build a culture of safety throughout the organization. And oh, by the way, this isn't woo-woo stuff. This is real world, because when you think about it, what's the number one reason that people leave their job? You know what it is? Not money. It's because their managers sucked. Mm-hmm. That's why they leave, because that's their interaction day to day. CEO can't always, if you've got 200 or 300 people, although what you were talking about, that gentleman that went down and had lunch with those are all critical, important things, but the manager's important. They are a leader. If they treat their people poorly, you're going to find a lot of turnover. So that's why the culture matters. And the leader's job is to build a culture that matters, that everybody understands that there is accountability about all things and how you treat people, how you treat performance, how you treat gender, diversity, all the issues that are big today. They've been big forever, by the way. They're just more magnified today. But that's really the job of a leader, is to build a great culture so people feel safe and empowered and can make a difference.
And if we even, if we're talking about real world examples, and we go back to, the era of the tech startup. Yeah. Now, different generation of people, same when I was coming up through the ranks, when I was at, Bell Mobility and then, on to Jaws, might as well say it. And, that was a culture where it was very unpredictable. Management and leadership was very unpredictable. You came into the organization knowing not even what you were VP of.
That's right.
And
my first time I had a executive title of nothing.
I know.
I was the VP of nothing.
Exactly. And the first time I saw you, I was like, oh, what are you VP of? Don't know.
Yeah. Like a Seinfeld episode, right, Leanne? It's a show about nothing. I'm an executive about nothing.
I'm a VP of nothing.
Yeah.
You can have one of my things. Yeah. I was VP comms and IR and PR. Just take one of my things. You can help yourself. It's fine. But that was really, because we were spread across different locations, and because, when the tech meltdown started, there was so much uncertainty and management was so unpredictable. And there was all kinds of crazy things that happened that we would never talk about on video. And so I think, if people had, and now, a credit to you, one of the reasons, because you became president pretty quickly, and also had the unfortunate task of laying everybody off. But the difference of how it could have rolled out, because of the very first set of layoffs that the CEO did, and then the layoffs that you told people, is all of a sudden people didn't want to leave. They wanted to come back. They started a chat board that was like ex-employees, and because you made them feel good, right? So big difference between someone coming and sitting in the CEO's office and who horrible ADHD, no time for anything, basically. So we're laying you off. Here's your package. You can go see HR. That's the extent. Most of the people he hadn't even met before, right? Yeah. And then you calling everybody in the boardroom and having a conversation, explaining to them the situation and how they're all valued. Like, just such a difference of night and day. And then the president at that, I was just before you became president, when the president called me as I was driving the kids to dance and said, "Oh, by the way, I think you're laid off." "Oh, really?" "Okay, no problem." I was actually relieved. And then I come in with my boxes. He's like, "No, actually, you're not laid off." And I'm like, "Well, what is it? Yes or no?" Because I already have another job.
Yeah. That was
right.
That was
It's just such a
interesting experience for sure.
And the authenticity, though, like, talk about, because I wasn't in the room actually. So talk about the difference, because that's sort of everybody's worst nightmare, probably from as a leader and as an employee. So the difference between an empathetic leader and a directive leader in that situation, because we saw the two different outcomes, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the directive side was you have to do the right thing for the business to survive. So that was the directive side. It was very clear. We had to go, I think the number, if I remember, was 325. The math was to get to 75. That's a lot of stuff, selling off businesses, doing all those things. So that was very clear in terms of what had to be done. The people side of things is the execution side. So now that you know what you have to do that. And I think you can be respectful. And at the end of the day, what I tried to do was, if they understood, if they were sitting in my chair, that they would have to make the same decision, then I knew my communication was going to be effective for them. And that was what happened. They knew it. They would come in, they knew it was time. They said, "Alan, we know that you have to do this." So my job was done because they trusted that was real. It wasn't a story. It wasn't bullshit. It was real. And it's because it was an emotional time for me. It was not easy. It's not natural for me to go in and have to do that and have those conversations. You do it because it's your job. And so never felt good about that, but I did feel good that at least we tried to treat people with respect, which is all people want, and treat them fairly. I mean, at the end of the day, that's all. This wasn't fair in terms of severance because they didn't have any severance. There was no money for severance, but at least
they didn't know that, though. Actually,
they didn't know it, but it was horrible as a CEO to know that and to go in with no bullets in your gun, to use a terrible analogy, but to be able to say, "Well, here's the box of Kleenex, here's HR, here's what we're doing," and off you go. But it can still be done with respect and caring for another human being, and I think that's what happened. Unfortunately, the business, as we know, had to. There's a whole other long video and movie and a book of the week or whatever you want to talk about it. But at least that example, I felt good about that experience. But boy, it teaches you that humans. That's what it's all about. It's always about that.
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, in my entire career, I have never met anybody who has laid off a huge boardroom full of people all at the same time and had people coming up and shaking your hand and actually didn't feel, I mean, obviously they feel bad about it, but they didn't feel bad about being laid off because you treated them with respect and dignity and explained the situation to them. They understood. They knew it wasn't anything personal. It wasn't about performance. It was, you answered questions about why some were staying and everybody else was going, and because it was just down to the core. And I actually, because you were just finishing as I was coming in with my boxes, because I thought I was going to, and actually it was my team you were laying off. Thank you very much. They were walking out with smiles on their face, which I was like, so did it happen or didn't it happen? Right?
Yeah. So, and they were good people. And, we could argue there was a lot of challenges around that business for sure. But the one thing that happened before I got there is there was a camaraderie and a culture and a vision that was set for that business that made everybody believe that it was possible. And I mean, the business lost its way for sure, but the people didn't stop believing. They always believed that it was possible. And, you know, it was hard for me to be the guy that had to put the pin in that balloon. But it was the right thing to do for the business. And, you know, I feel good about the outcome, but I'll never feel good that we had to do that.
Yeah. No, I know. And I think that it was, you know, well, giving credit where credit's due with that, it would have been a nice comeback story, but it wasn't. Yeah. But it was the same principle that we built it on, which was the communication of the company. And, you know, they were media darlings, like it really in an industry that was new, and people drank the Kool-Aid.
You know, part of leadership is vision, right? We're going to set a vision. You're going to be part of the team that's going to help us get there. And people want to believe in something, but it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a sports team or something spiritual. If you start thinking about that, going, my God, how do they do that? You can galvanize around one idea if it's clear. And that's what I think was well done at that company. But at the end of the day, in business, you need to execute against your vision, and you need to you do it for the right reasons. And there were some things that happened that, you know, ultimately didn't do that. But I think if you have a vision, people will follow that and be excited about it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think it also comes down to, unfortunately, they didn't have a leader like you in early enough. And there was some things from the very beginning that kind of, you know, were put in place that were kind of a bit of a bad situation. It was a bad situation from the beginning, from a financing perspective. But having said that, the leadership experience, what it showed, because, you know, you always try to take lessons away from, because I'm always learning from other leaders, obviously, in that case, you, learning from some of the other leaders at JAWS, what not to do and what doesn't work. And recognizing too that, you know, money doesn't always talk, right? Because some of the motivations were money.
Yeah.
Right. Everything was money based. So it's just interesting as I think back to some of our shared experiences, and then some of my experiences before BA, before Alan.
Oh, before Alan. Oh my God. Oh, wow.
is it's really about, you know, looking at what works and what doesn't work with people, right? Because obviously I'm a communicator, so I've always communicated with my teams and my staff, and I'm for sure authentic because I don't hide who I am. But just when you're talking about empathy and authenticity, I think it resonates, and I think clearly that's part of when you were on the YPO board, and, you know, some of the other things we've been involved with, you know, at Infinity, our own company, that bring things to us. Yeah. Yeah. So, because you're a bit of a magnet because you're authentic when you're out there. So what was one of the biggest things or were there a few big things you recognized as you traveled the globe, about other leaders in other parts of the world? I mean, there's obviously different customs, but
yeah, you know, it's interesting, Leanne. I think I would even expand that question to say, do other leaders we'll call it playing the role? When they were amongst ourselves as leaders in YPO, there was a certain way that they acted, respectful and loving and warm and beautiful. And then I see them in a different environment with their team, and they were more authoritative and tougher. And then I'd see them with their family, and they would have a balance of those two things. And so, and I found that depending on where they were in the world, it would be one or the other would dominate. They'd almost always be their best self, to use the overused word, in YPO, because they had to be. That was the culture of the peerdom. But when they had an authoritative role, they tended to put on a different hat, or at least you saw parts of them that were different. And I think, to me, one of the biggest messages that I have for all leaders, at least from my experience, is why be different? Why would you have to be different? It doesn't mean that with your family, you don't have to be tough sometimes. If your child's doing something, you can be loving and wonderful, but every once in a while you have to go, you're going to your room for a while. Well, that's the same thing that happens in business or can happen in YPO. And so to me, it's, if you're the same human being all the time, you don't have to act. You don't have to try to be different. I'm going to be different with my son. I'm going to be different with Leanne. I'm going to be different. I'm the same with Leanne. I try to be with our staff. I try to be with my family. I try to be with my YPO friends, because at the end of the day, I'm one person with several responsibilities. Now, let's be very clear. There are lots of tools in the toolbox that leaders use to get stuff done. Empathetic leader, we've talked about that a lot. I think if that's your baseline, every once in a while you have to pull out the get on my back, we're going over here, because that's what the team needs. So this is not to say that there's only one path to successful leadership. I think you need to be all of those. Great leaders have that ability, because sometimes the boat is sinking. And what do you think we should do? Get the water off the boat. Let's go. We're going this way. That happens. That's the real world. And what I think the biggest message I want all leaders, all of us to understand is that we have to act in the situation that makes sense. What do we call it? Situational leadership. If we always act with empathy and trust and love as our baseline, but understand that we're running a business that has to survive, people are the key to that success. Every once in a while, they need you to be that leader. They need you to be that one that's going to just go, put them on their back and go, because sometimes they need that. And it's time to figure out when to be able to use that. And that's what experience teaches you. And great leaders who are listening to this know that inherently. But between knowing and doing, Leanne, that's the books versus this. And all of you golfers know every video that you can look at on the internet to make you a better golfer. And does it make you a better golfer? Unless you're practicing, getting feedback and coaches. And that's where, coaching helps, right? Sometimes a good coach is a great help for you as a leader, just to make sure you're doing the right things. Knowing them and doing them, not always reality.
Now, there reaches a point, though, where leaders CEOs anyway, get to a point where in a certain size of company where they don't often deal with the employees. They're just dealing with their executive teams, right?
Yeah.
So, so you're leading your executives in hopes that they will in turn take the same authenticity and empathy and lead their teams, right?
Yeah, but so it's a lot to unpack there, but let's deal with the first part. The reality, if you're running a 5,000 person organization or 10,000 there's no chance that you could deal with all the employees. That being said, you hire the executive team and they hire the employees. So if you set the right culture and the right expectations around what you want to do, then each of those divisions become little companies with their own cultures based on the leadership that you're setting the tone for. Very critical to do that. Is it possible to be able to connect with every employee? No, it's not. But there are ways. Some of the things we talk about when a CEO is out front, not only in their town halls and the communications. And so some of the experiences that I've had personally with smaller companies, admittedly, but when you go do breakfast with the boss, one of those little, 30, 40, 50, 100 people at a time kind of deals. That's what they used to call them back 20 years ago. I wouldn't say that anymore. If you're open with the answers and the questions and all those other things, then at a time, you're now talking to 50, 100, 200 people at a time. Well, with the advent of this thing, you can talk to 5,000 people and they can get a sense of who you are. Are you real, or are you playing the role and putting the hat on the big public company CEO? You have to give them a confidence and feel that they can do that because they want to have a relationship with you. And one of the things that we do in our, not to put on a commercial hat for a second, but when a CEO is a good thought leader, they're also out there in another environment and social media and digital and speaking gigs, and employees can feel proud that their CEO's out there and seeing that person in a different context. So all those things kind of line up to say, I feel like I can connect to my CEO. I feel like I could pick up the phone and call him or her. You might not be able to, but that's what you feel you can do. And that's important.
Yeah, for sure. Although, and you're right. I mean, in the few experiences that I've had where it's, the Bell experience when we launched Bell BDI, Bell World, was an interesting experience because we got to build a very established and large company from the ground up, right? Mm-hmm. Because it was the child of Bell and Bell Mobility. But it was exactly that. People felt like they could approach and they had a friendly relationship. So if you're like the approachability of the executive, right?
Yeah.
So what, and I'll ask this to kind of wrap it up, because probably we could talk for another hour, but how would you say, what are the pivots or things that good leaders have had to adapt and change since a lot of our life has been on Zoom?
Well, I'll use my story. I mean, it's simple. I'm not the youngest guy in the room, but I had a belief of work ethic.
You are the only guy in the room, though.
Was I the only guy in the room? Anyways, I'm the only guy in the room now. But when I think back to my work ethic, has always been, I'm a hard worker, but I'm not someone who's going to be a workaholic and work 100 hours a week. I just never did and never. Well, I used to, but not anymore. But the reality is, I used to have this thought that, you come in at 8 and you leave at 5 or 6, and that's the visibility, right? What did I learn in the virtual world? Well, we were forced to be home. So we had to now force ourselves to look at work differently. So I had to adapt as a leader to say, it isn't about how visible they are, the staff. It's about, are they getting the work done? And then are they having the quality of life that they need to have, especially during COVID, where mental health was such a challenge because we couldn't connect with each other. So it changed my world to say, you know what? If we have the right people, which we do, and we have the right circumstances and culture of love and caring and whatever it is, then I don't care if they're working from home for 6 hours one day, 10 the next, and they can go pick up their kid. I had to learn that because I used to be 8 to 6, and why they're coming in 2 minutes late, and that was who I was. And
I know
I'm still a little bit like that, but yeah. But because I'm a big on-time guy, but that's my own issue. But that was what I learned, Leanne. And that adaptation, and I've had chats with other colleagues about that who have the same problem about how much do we bring them back to work and how many days. And I said, what does it matter? If you have the right people who are doing the right job, who cares if they're on the moon doing the job? You bring them together when you have to, and they do the work, and we need human connection. So we have to ensure that happens. But what if it's 4 days a week? You decide that for your business. And so that's a big learning for a lot of leaders right now.
Yeah, I also think it made me think about it when you said, your most important question, which is, what do you think? Because I find that because we are on Zoom all the time, Zoom and phone, but mostly Zoom, when someone comes with a problem and it's too easy because they're not in front of you to just answer it.
Correct. Because
you're almost trying to make up for not having that energy, right, between people.
Yeah.
So it makes it, you have to be intentional about that question.
What a powerful word. Isn't leadership, in fact, intentional until it's skill?
Yeah.
Right? Because skill is not something that, I've learned it in a book or whatever. I've now learned the concept. I now have to try it in the real world and see how it works. And then I have to be real about it. And when I screw up, I have to say I screwed up. And that's okay, right? It's okay to tell somebody I screwed up. They'll look at it and go, it's okay that you screwed up. I get that you screwed up. We know that you screwed up. Okay, we move on. That intentional word is critical. And
it's not hard to do. I admit that I screwed up all the time.
Well, because it happens so often, Leanne, it's easy. I'm joking.
Well, maybe not so often.
Only once a day. It's not often, not at all. So,
hey, listen, that's how I learn, and just kind of I'm excited to see how all of your content rolls out, because it's your perspective and journals on, because you have so much experience on, and that's why we could probably talk for hours, because you've been with so many different leaders in every single part of the world, I feel like, and not just with YPO, but with Soluber, right?
Yeah.
And worked, which is another opportunity that you've been, very involved in and helping to lead, where you've actually had people reporting to you from different parts of the world that, we've never experienced at Infinity.
Right.
And so it will be a really interesting perspective of real world, kind of the journals of, right? And so I'm looking forward to seeing how all of that rolls out, even though, and I'm sure there's like so many stories that I don't even know, that because we've never talked about it, because we were, especially the time when you were traveling around for YPO, right? I was running in all different directions with filming, and we didn't often see each other, but so I think that'll be a lot of fun. And I want to close this with our common thought on also putting content out that is for good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The social for good idea that, we want to start making a difference in moving the needle on social and digital, where we're putting out content that can help people be better. I don't know why it keeps disappearing, but help people be better leaders, help people, educate people, talk to them about, what I'm going to be talking to them about, which is thought leadership and their passions. But so I think that it will be interesting to watch your journals anyway as they unfold. So it's a whole new journey. So Alan, what's your big final thought on getting started on this to share? Because it's almost like launching a book a little bit at a time, right?
Yeah, I guess, the big message for me is self-awareness, right? Is that if you know how you come across, and that means you need to be attentive to how people, I jokingly said with you, why are you laughing? Well, I'm looking at you and I'm seeing your reactions to answers and questions because I'm talking to you. You're the most important person to me right now because you're interviewing me. When I'm talking to staff, it's the same thing. For that moment, it's that mindfulness conversation. Right. Be mindful when you're talking to someone, give them your time. Don't be doing this and that's really good. And why? You might be able to listen, but you're not listening. You're really not listening. So if you do this and you really take the time, that person's saying, how important am I to him, my boss? And oh, by the way, you're really listening. So you can hear exactly when you screw up and you see their eyes do something and you're going, I'm sorry, did I? Then you can have that conversation. When you're doing this, you're not looking at them in the eyes. So self-awareness while you're being a leader as much as you can. And by the way, it's impossible to be on all the time. To be very clear, there's no perfection in leadership. It doesn't exist. But when you screw up, if you've done enough deposits, then your staff will say, he's good 80%, 70% of the time, or she's good. So then you're going to be okay.
Well, it depends on what you did.
Well, not doing something stupid. I'm saying you made a stupid statement, or you forgot to do something, or you promised something you didn't deliver, or, there's a million different things that leaders do, because guess what? We're being pulled a million ways. Every leader is. If we could be a coach full time and everybody else takes care of the rest of the stuff, that's not the real world. That's not the way the real world works. Real world works is we are being pulled in a million directions. We have the same mental challenges that everybody in the world has. Politics, this, pulling it that way, inflation, do the math, supply chain, and we're worried about this and growing our business and doing this and dealing with the bank and dealing with your family. And that's reality. All that's real. And then you got to be on all the time.
Yeah.
So the reality is you can't be great all the time, but you can rebalance when you're off, because you'll be off. We've all been off. We've been off for a week. We've been off for a month. Rebalance if you're self-aware. And that's where your coach or your business partner, that you and I have had this long-standing relationship where if I see you going off the rails, I say, come on, man, what are you doing? Oh, I didn't realize that's great. And you do the same with me. That's great. We can be aware and support each other. That's what YPO does for me. It's a mirror to blind spots, which all of us have. But if you can be self-aware as a leader, you'll minimize those blind spots. Get a coach to support you, get help, and hopefully get good people around you who will call you on your shit. I think that's important.
Call you on your shit. That should be in the job description.
Yeah, call you on your shit. When you go there, right? It's not always your fault, but you got to be, that's the responsibility and the mantle that leaders carry. And that's why great leaders it lasts forever, by the way. Great leadership lasts forever. You could have made an impact on someone 20 years ago, and you didn't even realize that until 20 years later, you saw, oh, I'll never forget what you did for me. You go, what, where? It lasts forever. Yeah. And that's a big responsibility and a big opportunity for leaders.
And I feel like the exciting part is when and just talking about having impact in people's life, and having them actually tell you.
Yeah.
When they say, you interviewed me whatever time, and you took the time to ask about a situation that I had mentioned to you on the phone when we talked. And I realized that there are good leaders out there, and there are leaders that care, right? Like you made an impact in my life, and whatever it is, right? It could have been something as, wow, this was awesome. You did a great job on this. Like some people just don't have experience to that.
Leanne, sometimes it's the little things.
The
little things about, you asked about my wife who was not doing well.
Yeah.
Wow. Really? You care that much about me that you asked that and you meant it? Authenticity. You meant it. You're not saying it because it's on some list somewhere. You meant it because you really care. I want to make sure she's okay. Do you need anything from us?
Yeah.
So yeah, all of those things are stuff we're going to explore in the next sets of videos. I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. And I hope you're going to explore too. If the generations coming up, like I know that a lot of CEOs were freaking out when millennials were coming into the workplace en masse, and now, it's Gen Z. So I'd be interested sort of on your take in your content of sort of that effect that it has on what different kinds of leadership styles.
We'll explore it all, I hope.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for taking the time. I could talk to you for another hour, at least.
We might be doing that.
We might be.
Later.
Bye.